The sky burned a sickly orange as the island screamed. Houses collapsed like paper, flames climbed roofs, and the sound of gunfire mixed with desperate cries. Elouan staggered through the mud, his breath ragged, blood streaking down his arm. Behind him, corpses shuffled in broken rhythm, their jaws snapping, their eyes white and soulless. One of them wore the dress of his old schoolteacher. He wanted to scream, but his throat was dry as sand. All around him, people he had once greeted at the market were now monsters, hunting him like wolves in a cage. The island had fallen, and there was no way out. He stumbled into the broken gates of the harbor, only to see the last fishing boat explode in a burst of fire. Hope vanished in a cloud of smoke. He was trapped. Elouan pressed his back against the stone wall of the harbor tower, his heart beating like a drum inside his ribs. He wasn't alone. Across the square, through the smoke and ash, he saw 3 other figures. One was a tall woman with a long braid, her dress torn, a pistol clenched in her hand. Another was a boy no older than 15, clutching a wooden bat wrapped in wire. The last was a man with sunken eyes, limping heavily, dragging a machete along the cobblestones. Their faces looked as hollow as his own, exhausted, frightened, yet alive. For a brief moment, their eyes locked together. Survivors. Strangers bound by one truth: they had nowhere else to run. The creatures filled the square, their moans rolling like thunder. The smell of rot was unbearable, thick in the air. Elouan whispered a prayer he hadn't spoken in years, one his mother used to say when storms broke the island skies. Guide me, please." The woman with the braid fired her pistol, the shot echoing sharp across the harbor. One zombie dropped. The boy screamed, swinging his bat with all his strength, crushing skulls as blood sprayed. The limping man shouted, his voice raw, "Move! Up the tower! Now!" It wasn't courage that pushed Elouan forward, it was the raw, animal need to live. He ran, his legs burning as the dead swarmed closer. Inside the tower, the air was cold and damp. They slammed the heavy wooden door behind them, but already fists were pounding from the other side. The stone walls trembled with each strike. Elouan leaned against the wall, sliding down to the floor. His hands shook violently, but his eyes kept darting to the others. The woman's braid was dark with sweat. She reloaded quickly, her lips trembling though her hands stayed steady. The boy's face was pale, smeared with dirt and tears. The limping man dragged his machete closer, blood dripping from the blade. None of them spoke for a long moment. They only listened to the fists outside, the growls, the scratching. It sounded like hell itself was clawing to get in. Finally, the woman broke the silence. "This island, it's no longer home. It's a hunting ground." Her voice cracked on the last word. She looked at Elouan, her gaze sharp but filled with unspoken grief. "If we stay here, we die. If we move, maybe we die faster. But we must move." The boy shivered, whispering, "There's nowhere left to go. The sea is fire, the boats are gone. We're trapped." Elouan swallowed hard, his throat aching, his heart pounding in his ears. He wanted to say she was wrong, that there had to be a way. But outside, the pounding grew louder, and the first cracks split the wooden door. His stomach dropped. Maybe the boy was right. Maybe the island was already their grave. Days before the fire, before the screams, the island of Roche-Noire still smelled of salt and lavender. Children played near the docks, and the fishermen shouted their songs as nets slapped against wood. Elouan remembered it clearly, the calm before the storm. He had been walking through the market, carrying a basket of oysters for his father's stall, when he first noticed the whispers. People spoke of a sickness spreading on the mainland. At first no one cared. The island was small, cut off from the world, guarded by cliffs and tides. "It won't reach us," they said. Elouan wanted to believe it. He wanted to trust the sea that had always protected them. But behind every smile in the market, behind every laugh, there was unease. Eyes lingered too long. Hands shook as coins changed pockets. Something was coming. Among those who felt it most was Lysandre, the woman with the braid. She was not born on the island. She had arrived only 3 years earlier, bringing her sharp mind and her stubborn courage. People said she had fled from wars across the sea. She never spoke of it. Instead, she taught children to read by the church steps and carried an old pistol she never explained. When the first rumors of sickness reached Roche-Noire, she stopped smiling. Elouan remembered passing her that day in the market. She was staring out at the ocean, her face like carved stone. When he greeted her, she answered politely, but her eyes never softened. She knew something the rest of them did not. That same afternoon, the boy with the bat, his name was Amaury, had been caught stealing bread. He was only 15, an orphan who lived in the abandoned lighthouse with other stray children. The baker had grabbed him by the ear and shouted curses, dragging him through the square for all to see. People laughed. Elouan hadn't laughed. He remembered the shame on Amaury's face, the way he bit his lip until it bled, too proud to beg. It was Lysandre who had stepped in. She gave the baker 2 silver coins, freed the boy, and told him to stand tall. "The day will come when your hands will save us," she whispered to Amaury. Nobody knew what she meant. Amaury just ran off, clutching the bread to his chest, his eyes blazing with anger and hurt. Elouan remembered thinking, why would she defend him? Now, inside the tower, he finally understood. Not everyone shared Lysandre's foresight. The limping man Rémi was once a fisherman known for his strength. He had broken his leg years ago in a storm, yet he still worked the sea, dragging nets and hauling lines with a limp that never slowed him. People respected him, but they also pitied him, for he had lost his wife and daughter to the waves. Some whispered that the sea had cursed him. Elouan remembered seeing Rémi at the tavern days before the sickness spread. He was drinking alone, staring into the flames, muttering words nobody could hear. When Elouan's father greeted him, Rémi lifted his head and said, "The sea brings life, and it brings death. Both always come." His eyes were hollow, as if he had already seen the end. When the sickness finally reached the island, it came not with warning but with horror. A fisherman's wife collapsed at the market, foaming at the mouth, her skin turning pale. By nightfall, 3 others were sick. By morning, the first one had risen again, but she was not herself. Her scream echoed through the narrow streets as she attacked her own son. Panic spread faster than fire. By the time the mayor tried to calm the people, it was too late. The islanders turned on each other, some fighting, some fleeing, some praying. Roche-Noire had no armies, no walls, no plan. Only fear. And fear, Elouan realized now, was the true infection. The night the sickness first spread, the church bells rang without stopping. Elouan had run there with his younger sister, Clémence, hoping the priest would keep them safe. Instead, he found the pews filled with frightened families, their whispers sharp with fear. Mothers clutched babies. Old men held rifles across their knees. The air smelled of candle wax and sweat. Father Benoit stood at the altar, his voice trembling as he begged the people not to lose faith. But Elouan noticed Lysandre near the back, pistol at her side, eyes scanning every corner. She was not praying. She was watching. When their gazes met, she shook her head, almost as if warning him not to trust the comfort of walls or words. That was the first time he felt the crack in his faith that maybe prayers alone could not save them. Outside, chaos spread. Amaury and the lighthouse children ran wild through the streets, breaking into stores for food. People shouted at them, calling them thieves, but nobody dared chase them. Fear had stolen the island's unity. Elouan remembered seeing Amaury crouched by the baker's shop, stuffing bread into a sack. For a moment their eyes met. Elouan wanted to shout, to tell him to stop. But he saw the boy's thin arms, the hollow hunger in his face, and said nothing. He realized that everyone was fighting for survival in their own way. It wasn't stealing anymore, it was living. Later, in the tower, when Amaury gripped his bat with fierce pride, Elouan understood why. The island had turned him into a fighter long before the dead arrived. Rémi, however, saw things differently. When the sickness took his neighbor's family, he dragged their bodies to the sea and burned them on a pyre of driftwood. He said it was mercy. Others said it was madness. Elouan remembered standing on the cliffs, watching the flames lick the sky as Rémi stood with his machete, his face glowing red in the firelight. "We cannot bury them," he told the crowd. "The earth will not hold them. The sea must take them." Some called him cursed. Others whispered he was right. That night, Elouan could not sleep. He kept hearing the crackle of fire, kept seeing Rémi's hollow eyes, as if he had already accepted the world's end. Now in the tower, with Rémi's machete dripping fresh blood, Elouan realized the man had always known. Days passed and Roche-Noire began to tear itself apart. Families locked their doors, refusing to help neighbors. The mayor vanished and the small police force was overwhelmed. The infected spread faster than news, moving through the streets like shadows at dusk. Elouan's own father tried to keep the fish market open, but customers stopped coming. The sea no longer protected them, it became a prison. The ferries stopped arriving. Boats that tried to leave vanished into the mist. Rumors spread of creatures waiting in the waves, dragging sailors under. Elouan didn't know if it was true, but each empty dock filled him with dread. Even the gulls stopped crying, as if the island itself had gone silent. One night, Lysandre gathered a handful of people in the square. Elouan was there, drawn by her steady voice. She told them the sickness was not just an illness. "It is hunger itself, wearing human faces," she said. If we fight alone, we die alone. If we stand together, we may find a way. But fear was stronger than unity. Some spat at her, calling her a foreigner, blaming her for the curse. Others walked away, shaking their heads. Elouan stayed, his chest heavy with shame. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to stand with her. But his sister tugged his sleeve, whispering that she was scared, and he chose silence instead. Later, when the dead finally flooded the square, he would remember that moment, the choice to do nothing, and it would burn inside him like a wound that never healed. The morning the gates broke, the air was heavy with rain. Dark clouds rolled over Roche-Noire, swallowing the sun. Elouan had been at the harbor with his sister, searching for bread, when the first screams split the silence. A group of fishermen came running, their nets dragging behind them, shouting that the sickness had reached the western fields. People rushed to the gates with pitchforks, torches, anything they could find. Elouan followed, his heart pounding, his sister clutching his arms so tightly her nails dug into his skin. From the hill above the gates, he saw the crowd gathering. He saw the mayor at last, sweat dripping from his face as he shouted orders no one obeyed. And then he saw them, the infected, dozens of them, stumbling through the rain. Their eyes glowed pale in the storm light. Their mouths opened in soundless hunger. The people at the gates froze. Fear had turned them to stone. The first impact came like thunder. The wooden gates shuddered under the weight of bodies. Men screamed, pushing back with spears. Women pulled children away. The storm broke then, rain slashing across the square, turning the earth to mud. Elouan could hear the wood cracking, splinters snapping free. His sister cried, begging him to run. But his legs refused. He stood there, soaked in the storm, watching as the gates of Roche-Noire trembled like a dying heartbeat. Then with one final shatter, the gates fell. The crowd broke. Some fled to the church. Others fought and died where they stood. Elouan grabbed his sister's hand and ran, his ears filled with the sound of moaning, of teeth sinking into flesh, of his neighbor's final cries. It was Amaury who saved them that night. Elouan had dragged his sister through an alley, only to find 3 infected blocking the way. He froze, his hands empty, his mind blank. Then, from the shadows, Amaury swung his bat, striking one of the creatures across the head. The boy screamed as he fought, every strike filled with fury and desperation. "Run!" he shouted at Elouan, his eyes blazing. Elouan obeyed, pulling Clémence past the fallen bodies. It was the first time he had seen Amaury not as a thief, not as an orphan, but as someone who refused to bow to fear. Later, in the tower, when he saw the boy's trembling hands clutching that same bat, Elouan knew Amaury had carried them all longer than anyone had realized. The storm raged through the night. By dawn, Roche-Noire was no longer an island village. It was a hunting ground. The infected roamed the streets, tearing down doors, climbing through windows. Smoke rose from burning houses. The smell of salt and death filled the air. Elouan and Clémence hid in the cellar of the fish market, listening to the sounds above. They heard neighbors begging, footsteps running, bones breaking. They heard silence, then more screams. Every minute stretched like an eternity. When Clémence whispered that she wanted their mother, Elouan could not answer. Their mother had died years before. And in that moment, he realized he was all she had left. That thought weighed heavier than any storm. By the second day, there was no order left. The mayor was gone. The priest was torn apart at the church doors. Families turned on each other for scraps of food. It was then that Elouan saw Lysandre again, standing tall on the steps of the tavern, her pistol raised, shouting for survivors to gather. She was bleeding from her arm, yet her voice cut through the chaos like iron. "We will not kneel," she cried. For the first time, people listened. Some followed her, others cursed her, but all knew one truth: the island had fallen. There was no rescue, no escape, only survival. And in that moment, Elouan realized that the fight was no longer about reaching safety. It was about holding on to their humanity while the world tore it away. The pounding at the tower door grew louder, wood cracking like bones under weight. Inside, the survivors huddled in shadows, their breaths uneven. Elouan kept Clémence close, her small fingers digging into his sleeve. Lysandre checked her pistol, her braid dripping with sweat. Amaury paced, his bat clutched so tight his knuckles turned white. Rémi leaned against the wall, his limp more pronounced now, but his machete never left his hand. They were strangers, tied together only by the dead outside. Trust was thin like paper ready to tear. The boy spoke first, his voice shaking. "We can't stay here. They'll break through." Lysandre shot him a look sharp as a knife. "If we leave, we run into worse." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the groaning beyond the door. Elouan's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to ask if there was any plan, but words caught in his throat. It was Rémi who finally broke the silence. "We find higher ground," he said. His voice was rough, deep, like waves crashing on rock. "The tower staircase leads up. If the door falls, we climb. We fight from above." Lysandre hesitated, her dark eyes narrowing, then gave a small nod. "Better than waiting to be eaten." She glanced at Elouan. "You boy. Can you carry your sister up those stairs if it comes to it?" Elouan swallowed hard, nodding quickly. Clémence pressed her face into his chest, whispering, "I don't want to go up. I want Mama." The words cut him deeper than the wounds on his arm. He had no answer for her. The pounding turned to cracking. Splinters burst across the floor. Amaury let out a hiss between his teeth. "It's now or never." Rémi pushed himself upright, dragging his leg toward the staircase. Lysandre moved fast, covering his side, her pistol raised. Elouan lifted Clémence, his arms trembling but determined. Amaury stood last, bat ready, guarding their backs. The first plank of wood snapped. A gray, decayed hand reached through the hole, clawing wildly. Elouan's breath froze. He could smell it, the stench of rot, of wet soil and blood. Lysandre fired once, the shot echoing so loud the tower walls shook. The hand fell limp, but more replaced it. The dead would not stop. They were no longer neighbors, no longer human. They were hunger itself. Step by step, they climbed the spiral staircase. The stone walls pressed close, damp with years of sea air. The stairs groaned under Rémi's limp, each step sounding like a drumbeat of doom. Clémence whimpered, covering her ears from the sounds below. Elouan whispered promises he could not keep, that she was safe, that nothing would hurt her. His voice cracked with every word. Halfway up, Amaury froze, pointing his bat upward. There in the gloom a shadow moved. Not dead. Not alive. A man. His clothes were ragged, his eyes wide with terror. He held a rusted knife and snarled, "Stay back." Lysandre raised her pistol, but Elouan's breath caught. Another survivor. Or another danger. The tower was no longer just walls and stairs. It was a trap with enemies on both sides. The groans below grew louder as the door finally shattered. Wood split, iron hinges screamed. The dead poured into the base of the tower, their moans echoing up the stone. The stranger on the stairs panicked, brandishing his knife wildly. Amaury growled, "We don't have time for this." Lysandre shouted, "Decide now, fight him or trust him." Elouan's heart thundered. Every choice was death. Clémence clung to him, trembling. In that suspended breath, between the claws below and the knife above, Elouan understood the truth. The dead were not the only monsters they would face. Fear could turn the living into something far worse. The stranger's knife glinted in the dim light, trembling in his shaking hand. His hair was matted, his face hollow from hunger, but his eyes burned with desperation. "Stay back," he repeated, his voice cracking. Below, the tower shook as the dead slammed against the stone walls, their claws scraping louder with each passing second. Lysandre kept her pistol steady, her breath slow, her eyes sharp as a hawk. "If you stab us, we all die," she said. "Drop the knife, or you'll have more to fear than the dead." Her words echoed with authority, but the man's grip only tightened. Behind her, Rémi growled low in his throat, raising his machete. Amaury twitched with impatience, his bat ready. Elouan held Clémence tighter, her tiny heart pounding against his chest. The air was too thin, too heavy. One wrong move and blood would paint the stairs. The man's name tumbled out between sobs. Matthew. He claimed he had been hiding in the tower for days, surviving on rainwater and scraps. His family had been torn apart on the streets, he said, his voice breaking with every word. "I can't lose this place," he whispered. "It's the only wall left between me and them." Amaury spat on the floor. "Then share it or die with it." The boy's voice cracked, half fury, half fear. Lysandre lowered her pistol slightly, enough to show she was listening. "We aren't your enemy. The real ones are climbing these stairs right now. If we fight each other, they'll take us both." Her words cut through the tension like a blade, but Matthew's eyes still darted, filled with madness. He wasn't just afraid, he was broken. The moans below rose into a chorus, and the first infected clawed onto the staircase, their pale faces twisting in hunger. Rémi stepped forward without hesitation, his machete swinging down with brutal strength. Blood sprayed across the stone wall. "Decide," he roared. "Now or we all die here." Matthew's knife wavered. Elouan's throat ached as he spoke for the first time. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking, "don't make us enemies. My sister, she's just a child." Clémence peeked up from his chest, her small eyes wet with tears, whispering, "Don't hurt us." Something in Matthew shifted then. His hand shook, his shoulders sagged. With a choked cry, he dropped the knife, the metal clanging against stone. Lysandre lowered her pistol. For a heartbeat there was silence. Then the dead roared, climbing higher. They fought together, strangers bound by blood and fear. Amaury swung his bat until his arms shook, skulls cracking with each strike. Rémi's machete carved through flesh, his limp forgotten in his fury. Lysandre fired with deadly precision, every shot sparing a heartbeat more of life. Even Matthew, trembling and weak, kicked at the dead, his fear turned to frantic survival. Elouan tried to shield Clémence, but when one corpse lunged too close, he grabbed a loose stone and smashed until his hands bled. The smell of rot filled their lungs, the heat of exertion burning their skin. It wasn't victory, it was survival, second by second, breath by breath. When the last body fell, silence returned, broken only by their panting and the drip of blood down the steps. They had won, but barely. In the aftermath, they collapsed on the landing, bodies shaking from exhaustion. Lysandre cleaned her pistol, her hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. "We can't stay here. They'll keep coming. Towers fall like men do." Rémi leaned back against the wall, his breath heavy. "Then where?" he asked. No one answered. The island was no longer a home, no longer a village. It was a trap. Amaury broke the silence, his voice sharp, angry. "Someone brought this sickness here. Someone poisoned us." His eyes darted to Matthew. The man flinched, his face twisting with grief. "I lost everything," he whispered. "Don't put this on me." Elouan closed his eyes, clutching Clémence close. The truth was bitter. Whether the sickness came by sea or by man, it had already claimed Roche-Noire. And in that tower, Elouan realized survival would demand more than weapons. It would demand trust, fragile, dangerous, easily broken. By the third day in the tower, hunger gnawed at them like a second enemy. The sea wind howled through cracks in the stone, carrying the stench of death from the streets below. Clémence cried softly at night, whispering for bread, for milk, for their mother. Elouan held her close, but his stomach twisted with guilt. He had nothing to give her. The others fared no better. Rémi's face had grown hollow, his limp worse with each passing hour. Amaury's hands trembled from weakness, though he tried to hide it behind anger. Lysandre remained sharp-eyed, but her voice grew colder, clipped. Matthew muttered to himself, rocking in a corner, his grief spilling out in broken fragments. Hunger was changing them all, wearing them down like waves against rock. Arguments began in whispers. Amaury accused Matthew of hoarding food, his young voice sharp with fury. "You've been here longer than us. You must have something hidden." Matthew denied it, his eyes wide, his voice cracking. "If I had food, do you think I'd look like this?" Lysandre stepped between them, her pistol visible on her hip. "Fight each other, and you'll feed the dead faster than hunger ever will," she said. But her warning did little to soothe the storm. Elouan felt the air grow heavier with suspicion, every glance sharper, every silence louder. Even Clémence, in her innocence, sensed it. "They're angry," she whispered to her brother. He stroked her hair and said nothing. The tower creaked in the night as the infected prowled below, their moans echoing up the stairs. Sleep was scarce. Elouan dreamt of the market, of oysters and laughter, but always woke to the smell of rot. Lysandre took the night watch, her braid damp with sweat as she leaned against the window slit. She spoke quietly to Elouan once, when the others slept. "The sickness eats more than flesh," she said. "It eats trust. Once we lose that, the dead have already won." Her words chilled him because he saw it happening before his eyes. Amaury glared at Matthew with every bite of air. Rémi's silence grew heavier, his grip on the machete tighter. Even Lysandre's gaze carried shadows. They were alive, yes, but less human by the hour. It was Amaury who cracked first. At dawn, he woke the group with a shout, dragging Matthew by the collar. In his fist was a small leather pouch filled with crumbs and dried fish. "He lied," the boy spat, shoving Matthew to the floor. "He said he had nothing." Matthew wept, his hands raised in surrender. "It was all I had left," he cried. "Just a little. I was saving it just a little." Rémi's face twisted with fury. He raised his machete, his voice rough. "You'd let us starve while you kept this?" The air turned sharp as a blade. Lysandre's pistol rose again, steady as stone. "Stop," she ordered, her voice like thunder. "If we kill each other, there's no point surviving." Silence followed, broken only by Clémence's small sobs. Elouan hugged her close, his heart pounding. The tower felt smaller than ever, walls closing in. But suspicion could not be killed by words. That night, when the wind howled and the dead scraped their claws below, Elouan saw Amaury whispering to Rémi in the dark. Their faces were hard, their voices low. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw their eyes shift toward Matthew. Fear gripped him like ice. He knew what it meant. Hunger had planted a seed, and now betrayal was growing in its shadow. When he lay down beside Clémence, she pressed her face into his chest and whispered, "Promise you won't let them hurt me." He kissed her hair, whispering a promise he prayed he could keep. But deep inside, Elouan feared the truth that the living might kill them before the dead ever reached the top of the tower. The night shattered with the sound of stone breaking. At first, Elouan thought it was a dream, but then the tower shook, dust falling from the ceiling. The dead had found a weakness. Their claws tore at the walls, their bodies smashing against the base. Rémi cursed, grabbing his machete. Lysandre's pistol was already in her hand. Amaury clutched his bat, eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and excitement. Matthew whimpered, pressing himself against the wall. Clémence screamed, and Elouan's heart froze. The tower that had felt like a prison now became a tomb. If they stayed, they'd be buried in screams and blood. Lysandre's voice cut through the panic. "We move." Now, they burst from the tower's back hatch, a narrow wooden door leading into an alley. The storm had passed, but the streets were worse than nightmares. Corpses littered the cobblestones, some fresh, some old. Houses burned, sending smoke curling into the moonlit sky. The moans of the dead rose from every corner, echoing through the ruins of Roche-Noire. Elouan carried Clémence, her arms wrapped tight around his neck. She whispered, "Don't look," but he looked anyway. He couldn't help it. He saw neighbors half-eaten in the mud, children's toys crushed under boots, and blood staining the stones where he used to play. The island he had loved was gone. Only death lived here now. Rémi took the lead, limping but determined, his machete swinging at anything that moved too close. Lysandre followed close, her pistol sharp, her braid whipping in the wind. Amaury moved like a wild dog, snarling, his bat cracking skulls. Matthew stumbled in the rear, panting, eyes darting in every direction. They made their way through the alleys, keeping low, moving fast. But the dead were everywhere, stumbling from windows, crawling from sewers, rising from piles of corpses. The island was not just infected. It was consumed. "This way," Lysandre hissed, pulling them toward the old market. Elouan's chest tightened as he saw it. The stalls where his father once sold oysters were overturned, smashed, dripping with blood. His father was gone, he realized. The sea had taken him or the sickness. Either way, there would be no reunion. The market square became a battlefield. A horde of the dead surged from every street, their moans blending into one terrible cry. Rémi roared, cutting down 3 in one swing, his limp forgotten. Amaury screamed, his bat smashing teeth and bone, fury pouring from his small body. Lysandre fired until her pistol clicked empty, then used the butt of it like a hammer. Elouan, desperate, grabbed a broken spear from the ground and thrust clumsily, shielding Clémence with his body. Blood sprayed, teeth snapped, claws raked across stone. Matthew froze, covering his ears, rocking in panic. "Fight!" Lysandre screamed at him, her voice raw. "Or you'll die." But he stayed curled, trembling as if already lost. Elouan's arms ached, his breath tore from his lungs, but he did not stop. If he stopped, Clémence would die. That was enough to keep him moving. At last, Rémi cut through the last of them, his chest heaving, his machete dripping red. Silence fell over the market, broken only by the crackle of flames. Their small circle of survivors stood trembling, blood-smeared, but alive. Lysandre dropped to her knees, reloading her pistol with shaking hands. Amaury spat on the ground, his face pale with exhaustion. Elouan collapsed against a broken stall, Clémence pressed tight against him, her tears soaking his shirt. Matthew still rocked in the corner, his knife untouched by blood. Rémi stared at him with disgust but said nothing. The truth hung heavy in the smoke. They couldn't stay in the streets. The island belonged to the dead now. And if they wanted even a chance at life, they would have to find a new place to stand or fall like everyone else. The market square stank of blood and smoke. No one spoke for a long time, only their breaths rasped in the silence. At last, Lysandre lifted her eyes toward the horizon. The lighthouse loomed in the distance, its broken lantern jutting above the ruined harbor like a crooked finger. "If there's any safe ground left," she said, voice hoarse, "it'll be there. High walls, a view of every approach. We can hold it." Rémi grunted agreement, wiping his machete clean on a rag of cloth. Amaury's eyes sparked at the word hold, as if the lighthouse meant conquest more than survival. Elouan just hugged Clémence tighter, her tiny hand clutching his sleeve. She whispered, "Will there be bread there?" His throat tightened. Maybe, he lied. The path to the lighthouse wound along the coast, narrow streets pressed between cliffs and sea. Every sound echoed the scrape of boots, the cry of gulls, the groan of the restless dead. Matthew lagged behind, his face ashen, muttering prayers. Amaury hissed at him, "Keep up, coward," but Lysandre silenced the boy with a glare. Still, suspicion lingered in the group like a disease. Elouan could feel it. Amaury and Rémi exchanged looks, whispers too low for him to catch. Matthew avoided their eyes, trembling whenever Amaury's bat scraped against stone. Even Lysandre carried a tension in her shoulders, as though weighing choices she had not yet spoken aloud. Elouan felt trapped not just by the island but by the people around him. When they reached the harbor, the true horror of Roche-Noire revealed itself. The sea was thick with wrecks, ships torn apart by fire or storm. The docks were stained with dried blood, ropes swaying in the wind like gallows. Bodies dangled from the masts, strung by desperate survivors or cruel raiders. Clémence buried her face in Elouan's chest, whispering, "Don't let me see." He carried her faster, his eyes burning. Lysandre's jaw clenched. "Someone did this," she said low. "Not the sickness. Men." Her words cut like knives. The island was not only a hunting ground for the dead. It had become a graveyard built by the living. Elouan felt his stomach twist. If there were others out here, what kind of people would they find? The closer they came to the lighthouse, the louder the wind grew, carrying with it faint cries. At first Elouan thought it was gulls, but then he heard the words. Pleading. Human. Someone was calling for help. Rémi raised his machete, his face hard. It could be bait. Amaury spat, gripping his bat tighter. Or it could be food. Clémence tugged at Elouan's sleeve. "We can't leave them," she whispered, eyes wide. Lysandre froze, torn between caution and compassion. Her hand brushed her pistol, then dropped. "We'll look," she said. "But careful." They followed the cries to a small shack by the shore. The door creaked open. Inside, shadows shifted. Elouan's chest pounded. He felt the weight of every choice pressing down on them. The shack's darkness revealed a figure tied to a post. A woman, thin, her face hidden beneath tangled hair. She stirred, moaning weakly, her wrists raw from rope. Matthew gasped and stumbled back. Amaury laughed coldly. "She's alive." Rémi's eyes narrowed. Or bait. Lysandre moved closer, her steps slow, pistol raised. The woman lifted her head, eyes wide and wet, whispering, "Please?" Elouan's heart twisted. She was human, suffering, and he wanted to cut her free. But in the silence he heard another sound. Shuffling. Breathing. The scrape of claws against stone. The dead were near, drawn by her cries or set there to wait. And for the first time, Elouan wondered not if she would live, but if helping her would doom them all. The shack stank of damp wood and rot. The woman's voice cracked as she whispered again, "Please help me." Elouan's feet moved before his mind decided. He set Clémence down gently, reaching for the knots. But Rémi's machete blade slammed into the wood beside him, stopping him cold. "Don't," Rémi growled. His eyes blazed with suspicion. "We cut her loose, we don't just save a stranger, we bring her screams, her hunger, her sickness." Elouan froze, torn between pity and fear. Clémence tugged at his arm, whispering, "She's like Mama, we can't leave her." Her small voice pierced him like a blade. Lysandre's pistol hovered in the air, caught between mercy and caution. Amaury leaned close to Rémi, his voice low, sharp. "He's weak. He'll risk us all for some woman. We should end this now." Matthew, shaking, blurted, "We can't kill her. She's alive like us, God sees this." His voice cracked into silence as Amaury spat on the floor. "God is dead. And if you want to join him, follow this fool." He jabbed his bat at Elouan. The air in the shack thickened. Everyone's eyes cut toward Lysandre, the silent judge. She lowered her pistol slightly, her expression unreadable. "We help her," she said finally. "But quickly." She knelt, cutting the ropes with steady hands. The woman collapsed into Elouan's arms, sobbing. Her skin was ice, her breath shallow. He whispered to her gently, the way he did to Clémence on stormy nights. For a moment he felt like he had done something right in a world full of wrong. But the dead had already heard her cries. A moan rose from the cliffs, then another, then a chorus. The shambling mass poured toward the shack, their claws scraping stone, their teeth snapping. Rémi cursed, shoving Matthew toward the door. "This is what mercy brings," he roared. Amaury swung his bat at the walls as if the sound could drown out the horror outside. Lysandre's face turned steel. "Move," she shouted. "Now." They burst from the shack, dragging the half-conscious woman. The night was alive with shadows, the horde closing from every side. The lighthouse loomed above like salvation, but the path was long and narrow. Elouan carried Clémence with one arm, the stranger slumped against the other. Every step felt heavier than stone. As they stumbled up the cliff path, Matthew tripped, falling hard. Rémi grabbed him by the collar, dragging him forward but not gently. "Get up, coward," he snarled. Matthew's lips moved, whispering prayers, but his legs barely worked. Behind them, Amaury screamed with savage fury, smashing skulls with his bat, his young face twisted with a joy that chilled Elouan. The woman stirred weakly in his arms, whispering words he couldn't catch. He leaned closer and her breath brushed his ear. "Not safe, they're waiting." His heart stuttered. "Waiting?" Oh. But there was no time to ask. The dead were climbing the rocks, reaching for their ankles. Lysandre's pistol cracked, dropping one after another, but her bullets were thinning fast. At last they reached the lighthouse gates, tall iron twisted but still standing. Lysandre shoved them through, Rémi slamming the bars behind them. The horde crashed against the fence, hands clawing, jaws snapping, but for the moment they were held back. Inside, the lighthouse groaned like an old beast, its walls blackened by smoke, its door hanging loose. They collapsed in the courtyard, gasping, bloodied, shaking. Clémence pressed her face into Elouan's chest, whispering, "We made it." He kissed her hair, but his eyes stayed on the woman lying in the dirt. She had fainted, her lips pale, her chest rising shallow. And he remembered her words, faint and broken, "They're waiting." His stomach turned to stone. The lighthouse was not salvation. It was another trap. The lighthouse loomed above them like a blackened tooth, its windows empty, its lantern shattered. The air inside smelled of salt, rust, and old fire. Lysandre pushed the door open with her boot, pistol raised, eyes sharp. The others followed, their footsteps echoing in the hollow space. Elouan clutched Clémence close, his heart pounding. The bound woman lay weak in Rémi's arms now, her head rolling as she whispered faint fragments. "They're here, waiting," her voice made Elouan's skin crawl. The entry hall was littered with broken crates and burnt furniture. Strange symbols were scrawled on the walls in black ash circles, jagged marks, streaks like claws. Amaury's eyes lit with curiosity, running his hands over the drawings. "Not the dead," he muttered. "People did this." Rémi grunted, his limp dragging as he scanned the stairs winding upward. "Then where are they?" Silence answered him. Too much silence. Even the sea outside seemed to hold its breath. Clémence tugged Elouan's sleeve, whispering, "I don't like it here." He squeezed her hand, but fear twisted in his belly. They climbed the stairs, each step creaking like a scream. Matthew stumbled, muttering prayers, his voice a trembling thread. Lysandre snapped at him to be quiet, but her own hands trembled on the pistol. At the landing they found it, bones piled high, stripped clean, gnawed. Skulls grinned at them from the heap, children's and adults alike. Clémence whimpered and buried her face in Elouan's shoulder. Amaury laughed nervously, though his eyes flickered with unease. "Guess this is the hunting ground," he said, but no one smiled. The smell was unbearable, thick and sour. Elouan felt bile rise in his throat. Someone had feasted here, and it wasn't just the dead. Then came the sound. Not moaning. Not shuffling. Voices. Human. From above. They froze, listening. Laughter echoed down the stairwell, rough and cruel, followed by footsteps. Lysandre cursed under her breath, pressing them into the shadows. A lantern glow spread down the stairwell, flickering against the stone. Figures appeared, men, ragged, their clothes patched with blood and leather, blades glinting in the light. Raiders. Survivors, yes, but hunters of a different kind. Elouan's chest locked tight. The woman had been right. They weren't alone. The raiders spotted the pile of bones, then the strangers crouched in the corner. One grinned, missing teeth, raising a jagged knife. "Well, look what washed up," he sneered. Another chuckled, banging his club against the wall. "Fresh meat." Rémi lifted his machete, face hard as stone. Lysandre's pistol rose, fingers steady on the trigger. Amaury stepped forward, his young face twisted with a dangerous hunger. For the first time, Elouan feared not only the raiders but the boy beside him. Matthew whimpered, collapsing to his knees, whispering prayers louder now. The raiders laughed at the sound, circling like wolves. Clémence clutched Elouan's shirt, trembling. And in that moment, Elouan understood the dead weren't the only predators on Roche-Noire. The living were far worse. The raiders grinned like wolves circling lambs. The leader, a tall man with scars across his jaw, stepped forward, his lantern casting shadows that crawled across the stone walls. "You thought the lighthouse was empty?" he mocked, his voice low and cruel. No, this is our table. And you just brought us the feast." His eyes landed on Clémence and his grin widened. Elouan's heart turned to ice. He pulled his sister closer, whispering in her ear, "Don't let go." She nodded, though her small body shook. Rémi raised his machete, his chest heaving. "You'll not touch her." His voice was gravel, full of thunder. Lysandre's pistol clicked, steady as steel. "Step back," she warned. But the raiders laughed. "Bullets run out," one jeered. "Meat doesn't." Their laughter echoed through the stairwell, bouncing off bones and stone. Matthew sobbed openly now, his prayers tumbling into nonsense. Amaury's bat trembled in his hands, but his eyes gleamed with something strange. Hunger. Admiration. He looked at the raiders not with fear, but with a kind of longing. Elouan noticed it and his blood ran cold. The leader lunged first, blade flashing. Rémi met him with a roar, steel clashing against steel. Lysandre fired, the shot deafening in the narrow hall, dropping one raider instantly. Chaos exploded. Amaury swung his bat with a scream, shattering a skull, laughing as blood sprayed his face. Elouan thrust a broken spear, clumsy but desperate, keeping Clémence behind him. Matthew crawled into a corner, wailing. The raiders fought like mad dogs, their knives flashing, their clubs smashing. Blood slicked the stone, screams filled the air. In the chaos, Amaury turned, his bat raised high not at a raider but at Matthew. "Useless coward," he spat, his voice cracked with rage. The bat came down, cracking Matthew's arm with a sickening snap. Matthew howled in pain, crumpling to the ground. Elouan froze, horror slicing through him. Amaury's grin was wide, savage. "He slows us down," he snarled. Rémi cursed, nearly cut down by a raider as he turned to shout, "Amaury, stop!" But Amaury didn't stop, he lifted the bat again, ready to finish Matthew. Lysandre's voice cut the air like a whip. "Amaury," she roared, her pistol aimed at him now instead of the raiders. The boy froze, panting, his chest heaving, eyes wild. The raiders hesitated, amused by the spectacle, laughing even as blood dripped from their blades. Elouan's heart pounded. He clutched Clémence tighter, realizing with terror that the group was breaking apart. The dead were outside. The raiders were inside. But the most dangerous enemy might already be within their ranks. The stairwell was a storm of screams, blood, and steel. Lysandre's pistol pointed at Amaury, but the raiders closed in, laughing, their blades flashing in the lantern light. "Kill each other," the scarred leader sneered, circling, "makes our work easier." His words dripped with venom. Elouan pressed Clémence into the shadows, his spear clutched tight, his whole body trembling. He didn't know what terrified him more, the raiders or the wild light in Amaury's eyes. Rémi roared, swinging his machete with brutal force. He cut down one raider, then another, blood spraying across the walls. "Fight them, damn you," he shouted at Amaury. But Amaury's bat still hovered over Matthew, his lips curled in a sneer. "He's dead weight," Amaury spat. "If we carry him we all die." Matthew whimpered, clutching his shattered arm, whispering prayers through tears. Lysandre's jaw tightened, her pistol locked on Amaury's face. "Choose, boy," she said, her voice hard as iron. "Them or us." The moment cracked like glass. Amaury screamed, swinging his bat not at Matthew, but at a raider lunging from the shadows. The man's skull caved with a crunch. Amaury turned, his face twisted, blood splattering his cheeks. "I fight," he growled. But in his eyes, Elouan saw something broken. He wasn't fighting for survival. He was fighting for the thrill of it. And that terrified Elouan more than betrayal. The battle surged upward. The survivors hacked and shoved their way up the spiral stairs, step by step, dragging Matthew when he stumbled. The raiders fought with cruel laughter, throwing bodies into the walls, spitting blood and curses. Lysandre fired until her pistol clicked empty, then used it as a club. Rémi's limp worsened, blood soaking his trousers, but he didn't slow. Amaury shrieked with every swing of his bat, lost in frenzy. Elouan stabbed with his spear, clumsy but desperate, shielding Clémence with his own body. At the top, the lantern room waited, shattered glass, rusted gears, and the stormlit sea stretching endlessly beyond. The raiders pressed close, forcing them against the broken windows. One raider grabbed Clémence's arm, yanking her from Elouan's grasp. She screamed, her small hands reaching. Elouan, his soul tore in half. He lunged, stabbing the spear through the raider's chest, screaming louder than he ever had. The man collapsed, dragging Clémence down with him. Her cry echoed through the lighthouse as the battle raged on, hope slipping away with every breath. The lantern room was a cage of shattered glass and blood. Wind howled through broken panes, scattering ash and the stink of death. Elouan clutched Clémence tight, dragging her back from the raider's body. Her sobs tore through him, raw and terrified. "I've got you," he whispered, though his hands shook so badly he could barely hold the spear. Around them the fight raged like a storm. Rémi staggered, his limp dragging, blood soaking his thigh, but still his machete rose and fell with the rhythm of survival. Lysandre fought like a flame, her braid wild, her pistol now a hammer in her fists. Amaury spun with his bat, laughing, screaming, drunk on violence. Matthew crawled along the floor, one arm useless, clutching a shard of glass like a cross. The raiders pressed closer, their leader grinning with teeth stained red. "You're not survivors," he sneered. "You're supper." The clash broke into chaos. Amaury turned suddenly, swinging not at a raider but at Matthew again. The boy howled, shielding himself with his shattered arm. Lysandre moved faster than thought. Her pistol cracked, the bullet slamming into Amaury's chest. He froze, eyes wide, then collapsed, his bat clattering to the floor. The room went silent for a heartbeat. Elouan stared, his chest heaving. A child, their companion, their fighter cut down by their own hand. Lysandre's jaw trembled, though her eyes stayed hard. "He was gone," she said. "Better me than them." The silence shattered with a roar. The raiders surged forward, rage replacing laughter. Rémi bellowed, his machete carving a bloody path. Lysandre fought beside him, her body shaking but steady. Elouan thrust his spear, Clémence screaming behind him. Matthew, desperate, drove his shard of glass into a raider's leg, buying a breath of space. But the leader charged, his knife flashing, aiming straight for Clémence. Elouan threw himself in the way. The blade tore his shoulder, white fire exploding through him. He screamed, dropping to one knee, blood soaking his shirt. The world spun. He saw Clémence's wide eyes, saw the raiders sneer, saw Lysandre raise her pistol, Rémi roar, Matthew crawl. Then the floor beneath them cracked with splintered, glass rained down, the storm's wind tearing through. The lighthouse itself seemed to cry out. Elouan's vision blurred, his arms tightening around Clémence. He whispered, "Not her. Not her." And as the raiders lunged again, the lighthouse began to fall apart, its bones breaking under the weight of the battle. The lantern room groaned as the storm and battle tore it apart. Beams cracked, glass exploded outward, and the floor sagged beneath their feet. The raider leader lunged at Elouan, knife raised, but Rémi intercepted with a roar. His machete sank deep, splitting the man in two. Blood sprayed across the broken lantern, and the leader collapsed with a grunt. Rémi staggered, breath ragged, his limp worse, but his eyes burned with fire. "Up," he barked. "Move before it all falls." Lysandre pulled Elouan to his feet, her strong hands steady despite the quake of the lighthouse. Clémence clung to her brother, whispering through tears, "Don't leave me." "Never," he rasped, his wounded shoulder screaming. Matthew limped beside them, pale but alive, clutching his glass shard like a holy relic. Together they fought their way down the spiral stairs, the last raiders chasing, teeth bared, weapons raised. Rémi turned at the landing, standing tall despite his bloodied leg. "Go," he shouted. "I'll hold them." Lysandre froze, eyes wide. "You'll die." He grinned, teeth red. "Then I'll take some with me." The last thing Elouan saw before Lysandre dragged him onward was Rémi's figure in the stairwell, machete swinging, his roar echoing like thunder. The clash of steel and screams followed them until the lighthouse itself collapsed. The tower fell in a storm of fire and dust, crashing into the sea. Waves swallowed it whole, silencing everything. The dead at the gates moaned, crushed beneath rubble. The raiders vanished in the wreckage. Roche-Noire's beacon was gone forever. When the dust cleared, morning light broke over the island. The survivors Elouan, Clémence, Lysandre, and Matthew stood on the cliffs, staring at the smoking ruins. The wind carried salt and ashes. Elouan's arm bled freely, but Clémence pressed her tiny hand over the wound, whispering, "It'll be okay." Her faith broke him open. He knelt, hugging her with his good arm, tears burning his cheeks. Lysandre's face was carved of stone, but her eyes glistened. Matthew whispered a prayer for Rémi, his voice trembling but whole. For the first time it was not a prayer of fear but of thanks. The island was broken, haunted, and hungry. But in the ruins a handful of souls still lived. Elouan lifted Clémence onto his shoulders, her small body silhouetted against the dawn. "We're still here," he whispered, more to himself than anyone. The sea stretched wide, endless, terrible but also free. Lysandre looked at him, her voice low but fierce. Then we'll find a way off this rock. For him. For all of us. Elouan nodded. Behind them, the dead wailed in the ruins of the lighthouse. Ahead of them, the horizon burned gold. The hunting ground had not claimed them. Not yet.